Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomfield Township Library for another one of our series of wonderful programs. Today we have Nicholas A. Marsh presenting a wonderful synopsis of the 19th century mover and shaker, shall we say. Nicholas was born in Ann Arbor and graduated from Eastern Michigan University and Central Michigan University with degrees in educational administration and counseling psychology. In between his educational pursuits, he served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era. As he worked in Michigan, Kansas, and Kentucky, his interest in local Michigan history became a hobby that produced several books connected to Washtenaw County, where his family lived since before Michigan became a state. Remembering Delhi Mills, Scioto Village, Ghost Town with a Past, History of Ann Arbor's 31st Michigan Volunteer Infantry in the Spanish-American War are just a few of the books he has written. Numerous articles in periodicals in Michigan History Magazine, The Chronicle, and Ann Arbor Observer, etc. That interest in local history expanded due to a long family history with Michigan railroads, producing two books related to railroading: the Michigan Central Railroad, History of the Main Line, 1846 to 1901, and The Railroad King, James F. Joy, which won a Book of the Year award from the Historical Society of Michigan in 2002. So without further ado, let's let Nicholas Marsh bring a little joy to Bloomfield this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I was going to use that line about bringing joy to the library today. I first became aware of James Joy, the superstar railroad man and lawyer, when I wrote the history of the Michigan Central Railroad that he just mentioned. It's such a shame that he's not known more in Michigan about what he did, because he was really dynamic and productive. And I used to travel on Joy Road when I was a kid, up near Dexter. I had an great aunt who lived on that road, and I didn't know it was who Joy Road was named after. For those of you who don't know, Joy Road runs from about Grand River in Detroit out to Dexter. It's almost straight west. And that was given to him as an honor probably just a couple of years before his death. There are some reports that say that it was changed in around 1850, but that's not accurate. And also there's some books published in the last 10 years that give credit for that name from his son and his son's work with Packard, but that's not exactly right either. So what you have in front of you is my biography on James Joy. When I look at it sitting here right now, I think that I probably should have said or changed the title to the Forgotten Railroad King, because he really has been forgotten by our history, and it's a darn shame. Okay, when I was putting this book together, I tried to find a photograph of him as a young man, because if you see anything much when you're looking at history, railroad history of Michigan, you see this old gentleman in his 70s. And that's, he was so active when he was younger. He started slowing down by this time, but I couldn't find one. And I worked on this book for about 10 years, really. There were so many things to check out, and because he worked all over the Midwest. But lo and behold, about 6 months ago, I stumbled on another photo of him as a young man at 41. This was offered for sale, and after I got it, I saw that it was a professionally done photograph in about 1930. And I wasn't, I was pretty sure it was him because there's a great likeness with the old pictures. But since I wrote this book, I've been in contact with some of Joy's relatives. So I sent them a copy, and they said, "Yeah, that's the guy." Okay, so let's get into, let's see here which way I'm going. Let's get into Joy's story. Okay, Joy was born in Durham, New Hampshire, pretty much right on the ocean there, and his dad owned a blacksmith shop, and his father was a strong proponent of education. He had 11 kids, so I guess he felt obligated to help fund the local schools. Joy was ready to leave as soon as he graduated, probably because he had so many siblings. I don't know for sure, but he didn't want to work in the blacksmith shop of his dad's. So he went to Dartmouth College. There he was valedictorian. And when he graduated, he was fluent in 3 languages, French, Greek, of all things, and Latin. I didn't know you could be fluent in Latin, but and he was going to be a teacher. He taught school and tutored to work his way through school. But when he got done, he decided he wanted to be a lawyer. No indication why, that I could find anyway. So he applied to Harvard and was accepted. And he graduated in 1835. When he left Harvard, he had a letter of introduction, which was one way to have a reference for a job. But his letter of introduction was from Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Joseph Story. Story taught at Harvard, and he developed a relationship with James Joy because he was so brilliant. And around the same time, well, within a year after he graduated from Harvard, Joy got a letter from his friend, Zachariah Chandler, in Detroit. He'd met Chandler at Dartmouth. Joy actually rented a room from Chandler's dad, and Chandler was about 3 years younger than Joy, so they got along really well, and Joy actually tutored Chandler and helped him with schoolwork. And you might know the name Zachary Chandler, might ring a bell, because he ended up being a mayor of Detroit, a state rep, a U.S. senator, and the head of the Department of Interior during the war between the states. So one day, Chandler's sister, who owned a store with her husband in Detroit, wrote Joy a letter and said, well, the sister wrote Zach Chandler the letter and said, "I need your help. Can you come?" So he did. And then after he got to Detroit, he liked it so well, he wrote a letter to Joy and said, "You graduated, come out to Detroit and take a visit." Well, Joy already had an uncle and I think 3 cousins living there, but it doesn't seem like he was very close with them, because didn't find much mention after that happened. So Joy decided to go. The slide this up is not, I can't take credit for it being really accurate, because once he graduated from Harvard, I don't know how he got to Detroit, but most people with some wherewithal and a little bit of money took the steamboats, the side wheelers, rather than travel over that much land. Okay, so with Zach Chandler owning the store in Detroit, he became pretty well off to a degree, but very popular. I guess he must have had a personality because he used to mingle among all the prominent people in Detroit. So when Joy got to Detroit, Zach Chandler took him around. And Joy was in need of an internship because with his law degree, if he wanted to stay in Detroit or Michigan and practice law, he had to have an internship. And one of the movers and shakers that Zach Chandler introduced him to happened to be the mayor of Detroit and U.S. Senator Augustus Seymour Porter. So I think it was probably a 6-month, it sounds like it was a 6-month internship. And when Joy was done, he opened up his own law office at age 26. And that really didn't go very well for whatever reason. Could have been the economy, but he had to take some part-time jobs. So he took a part-time job as a school inspector. He also signed up to be in the Detroit militia. And both those jobs lasted about a year. He decided to try to open an office again at age 27, but this time he took a partner, which was a good idea for him because his partner was a very experienced older lawyer, George Porter, who was also a lawmaker. So he was a mover and shaker as well. So he brought in a lot of business, and that business was beyond successful. They became pretty quickly the most prominent law office in the region. They had clients in New York and Boston and St. Louis. I don't know how people got to them because there weren't any trains. That's a long walk to find a lawyer. Anyway, that reputation was noticed by a bunch of guys on the East Coast. And I was trying to figure out what should I call them. They were China traders, but they were all businessmen. But several of them became multimillionaires from the 1700s trading with China. China was locked up at that time, only allowed one company in for like a century. And this family and the relatives all took turns doing trading with China, and they all became rich. But there were other people who didn't do China trading that were involved in this. Anyway, there were 24 men with a lot of money, and they decided they wanted to buy the Central Railroad from Michigan. Michigan was in trouble. They tried to develop the interior with railroads and canals, but they didn't have enough money to follow through on that. So things that were started never got finished, and they were going bankrupt. So they had to sell the railroads, and the best one, meaning the one that was finished the farthest, was the Michigan Central, but they didn't call it Michigan. I keep referring back to the other name. Anyway, it was called the Central Railroad. It ran from Detroit to Kalamazoo. So these guys on the East Coast wanted that railroad, so they hired Joy and Porter to get the purchase through, because the Michigan lawmakers were tough. They didn't really want to give the railroad to wealthy people from out of state, and there was a big fight, and it took a long time, but finally the deal was done. These East Coasters owned the road. They realized that they needed Joy and Porter for other things after that. because the road was only built to Kalamazoo. They had right of way that had to be purchased. And they really operated from their offices on the East Coast. They didn't want to come. They weren't hands-on people for the most part. So they hired Joy and Porter at $500 a month, which is about $10,000 in today's money. Hired him. Excuse me. Hired them to get that job done, to buy the rail right away from Kalamazoo down to Benton Harbor, which was the terminus at the time. Excuse me. Haven't talked this much in quite a while. So it was a very short time before the East Coast owners decided that they did not want to stop at Benton Harbor. They wanted to go to Chicago. So that meant that Joy and Porter had to deal with lawmakers in Indiana and Illinois to get permission to get the railroad to go through those two states. And the lawmakers of those two states saw an opportunity to pull some money out of these rich people on the East Coast. Because of course, they knew that they already spent $2 million buying the Central Railroad from Michigan. So rather than go through how hard it was, they got the job done. And in Indiana and Illinois pulled a considerable amount of money from those wealthy people. Indiana charged $500,000 for a charter to go through Indiana, and Illinois wanted those wealthy people to pay $2 million for stock in their Illinois Central Railroad that they didn't have a nickel to put towards building their own railroad. So the deal was done, and the new Michigan Central Railroad could get to Chicago, and it got into Chicago in 1852. And a couple of things, this thing is touchy. Several things were going on around that time period when Joy and Porter were trying to get the new Michigan Central to Chicago. And I couldn't think of a way to illustrate that on a slide. So I just indicated that that 150 miles from Kalamazoo to Chicago changed Joy's life because so many things happened. First thing was Joy got involved with a group of men that were trying to or were interested in getting the contract to build the Soo Canal. And Joy wrote up the paperwork, the company charter, and anything else that had anything to do with preventing them from, or making them able to prevent or to give a bid on that job. And the feds, it was a federal job, and they weren't going to pay in money, they were going to pay in land. And they, long story short, Joy and that group did get the bid, and the land associated with it was 750,000 acres of Michigan land in northern Michigan and in the UP. So after they got the job done, got the canal built, I think it was in 56, then all those guys that were in that group, there weren't that many. I think there were like 6 or 7, including Joy. They became rich selling that land. And something a little bit interesting to me was when I was writing this bio of Joy, I talked to somebody who knew one of the family members living in northern Michigan. And they told me that that family is proud of the fact that some of that land from that Soo Canal grant in the early 1850s is still in the family. The second thing that happened in this 150-mile stretch, all of Joyce and Porter's success in dealing with the Illinois and the Indiana lawmakers made the Illinois Central Railroad group interested in Joy. So they hired him at $5,000 a year, which was about the equivalent of $100,000 today. And what Joy did for the Illinois Central Railroad was he built the legal department. And part of that was the hiring of Abraham Lincoln as one of the lawyers for the legal department. Excuse me. Also, Joy and Lincoln defended the Illinois Central Railroad from some court cases, and one of them went to the Supreme Court. Had to do with state interference with national railroads. And they won the case. It had to do with the county wanted to tax the Illinois Central. And they found out they didn't have the authority to do it. Seems like there was one more thing. Oh yeah, one more big thing. Before they even got to Chicago. What's going on with this? Having trouble with the slides a little bit. I'm sure it's on my end. Before Joy got the Michigan Central to Chicago, cadre, a few of these guys who bought the Michigan Central wanted to continue building past Chicago. The reason being that that area of land was very, very fertile and known from throughout the East Coast. People who had visited that it was a gold mine and agriculture. So some of those money guys bought some railroads that were they bought 4 railroads in Illinois. Northern Cross, Peoria, Central Military Tract, and Chicago and Aurora. They weren't finished. Only 2 of them were started, and 2 of them were just charters on paper. And some of them were going the wrong direction. So Joy had to go to the lawmakers in Illinois and get the charters changed so they would be going in the correct direction, which was towards Chicago from the port of Quincy, and one from East Burlington also be able to go to Chicago. At that time in our country's history, the Mississippi River running down that side of Illinois was the largest area of trade in the United States. And they wanted to be able to take advantage of that, coming and going, because at Chicago, they had access to Lake Michigan. Okay. That was the 3 things that happened during the time that it took Joy to fix the 150 miles of track down to Chicago. Okay, so Joy was working really 2 jobs now. He was the lawyer representing the Illinois Central, and he was in charge of helping the railroad work its way, the big railroad, and the largest railroad in the world, as a matter of fact, 471 miles, to get that built. And he was also working to get what come to be known as the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad going. Well, this doesn't have that on there. Okay. Well, you can, if you can see my cursor. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the railroad, oh, something's funny going on with the, okay, we'll skip ahead to this one. This is the area that was controlled by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy that was built up by none other than our hero, James Joy. It literally blocked out everybody else from the middle of Nebraska down to middle of Kansas, top half of Missouri, bottom half of Iowa. Everybody involved with it became rich. And one example that I can give you is the fourth or fifth president of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy's name was Walker. Last name was Walker. And one of his direct descendants was George Walker Bush. So you know where Mr. Bush inherited money from, that way up, way down the line. Okay, let's see if I can get control of this. Okay, this is a picture of the Chicago Railroad Gate, obviously. While Joy was working in Chicago, a problem started to arise with the residents and with the lawmakers. There were 58 different stockyards, small stockyards throughout Chicago, and the people that lived there were complaining because stockyards smell. And of course, the railroads, there were eight railroads that were coming in and out of Chicago at the time. And of course, the railroads didn't really care that much about the people smelling. It's things they didn't want to smell until the railroads started getting landlocked, roadblocked. So Joy took it upon himself to approach those other 7 railroads and say, let's build a stockyard outside of town, actually southwest of Chicago, and make it really nice and solve our problem. So they did. They all chipped in and they built a super, I think it was 300 or 400 acre stockyard, had a restaurant and a hotel, and it was finished in, I believe it was finished sometime in the middle of the Civil War. And that's why they were having so much trouble with the stockyards being full, because people were trying to supply the men that were fighting. So anyway, so the stockyard opened in 1863. It ran open and working until about 1971, so more than a century. And Chicago made it a historical site. And then shortly thereafter, I think that was in 72, shortly thereafter, in 1981, it became a national historical site. So Joy has his name on a national historic site. Well, his name isn't on it, but the stockyard was his baby. So we know that. Yeah, before too long, Kansas was being looked at as being the next major railroad hub to take the place of Chicago. Joy, with his vision, always wanted to stay ahead of the game. So he really focused on Kansas City. And the first thing he did was something that was deemed impossible at the time. He built a bridge, had a bridge built across the Missouri River. People tried it and couldn't do it. There's something with the current is too fast, and the bottom was too slippery or not solid, or I don't know what it was. But people had already built railroads across the Mississippi with no trouble, but this Missouri was really giving people fits. But Joy got it done. It was such a big deal that the governors of the surrounding states came for like a festival, and they had public speakers. And somebody, a professor from Iowa University, wrote a poem that included ode to Joy, to Mr. Joy. It was quite the big deal. Joy started buying land around Kansas City too, thinking in advance. So once Joy got to Kansas City, he started building roads in Kansas. Can you see Kansas City being about right here? And with his vision, he had a plan. He always had a plan. This plan was to run a road or two down to Texas. That's what these north-south roads are for. And he also was going north. The road that's this half turn was going up a little bit farther to meet the Union Pacific Railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, so he could have access to California. Now, this did happen. The Union Pacific did come to that area, and his railroad did connect. But there was a problem with the southern part of the roads, because the government, this is a hypothetical, I didn't read this anywhere, but this little green area at the bottom is Oklahoma. And at the time it was Indian territory. And they had a contract, the government had a contract with the Native Americans to only let one railroad go through. And there were three or four or five coming from different locations that wanted to go through, not just Joy with his one or two. So they had a contest. The government offered a contest. The first one to build down to the border would win the right to go through Oklahoma and then into Texas. Galveston was where he wanted to go. He even had a railroad purchased down there. I can't think of the name of it right now, but he had a man down there on the as a director. But the contest was run, and of course Joy got down to the border first. But the government said he was half a mile outside the limit that they needed the railroad to hit, which was not a stipulation anywhere. So I think they just cheated him. And they might have done it to quell some bad feelings in the area, because it really got hot when Joyce started building these roads down here. There were some of the local people. Some of this road went through land that was still being sold to settlers, and they thought the big rich railroad people were horning in and getting the good land, and they came and burned railroad equipment, and it was a big problem. There was a shootout, so people got killed. Joy ended up getting the U.S. government to bring some cavalry in there to stop that mess that was going on, that violence. Anyway, so Joy could not get where he wanted to go. So he got out of that part of the railroad business, sold out. Not ready for you yet. Let me go back. No. But there is a road here that somebody else took over. This road, if you can see my cursor, the road that's kind of heading west, was deemed to go to the San Antonio. Texas. No, not San Antonio. Arizona, anyway, or New Mexico. And one of Joy's, this road was sold too, but one of Joy's former superintendents on the Michigan Central, by the name of William Strong, he mentored under Joy for just a couple of years, a year under the Michigan Central, and then a year or two under the where was it? I guess it was the Chicago Burlington. There's too many roads. I mean, way too many roads to remember all the roads that Joy worked with. Anyway, he left employment there and got to be the superintendent of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. Yeah, Santa Fe was the goal. Now it comes to me. So he built from there to Santa Fe, New Mexico, kind of for his mentor, I guess. Joy probably thought well of that, but I didn't read anything that said he did. What else about this? Oh, okay, one more thing about this map. I know it's not a very good map. I apologize for that. But the Kansas River ran right here, and there were some railroad work north of that, but south of that there was nothing. So Joy was the first one to start to really bring a railroad south of the Kansas River. And he did that kind of in one part in a unique way. And I like this picture. That's one reason why I use it. This is the Kansas River. It was only 2 feet deep. So Joy was able to build what they call the crib, stone cribs. That's what's down here under the track, to get this locomotive down where he could use it south of the river where he was building his railroads. Okay, this is maybe a little bit of an explanation of what we were just talking about. Joy was trying to get here to Galveston, but that didn't happen. Santa Fe, but that did happen, but not with him. So he didn't own that road. There were some other roads that I had on another map. I should have, maybe I can show you with the cursor. 1871, you could, because of Joy, you could get on a train in Detroit, go to Chicago, go to Kansas City, go north where the Union Pacific stopped right here, and go to San Francisco in 1871. And I guess that's all I can say about this particular thing. Okay, another group of railroads that Joy was involved with. Somebody in another article, I don't know where, called it the River Road 8. And I guess it's because there were 8 roads. I put this map together, but the roads that are in green were small, narrow gauge roads, meaning they weren't regular railroads. They were smaller cars and smaller track. Oh boy. Somehow he found out that this guy who was building this Chicago, Dubuque, Minnesota, and Chicago, Clinton, Dubuque, was going bankrupt on this stretch right here. I don't know why he had two. It was the same railroad, but why he had 2 different names, I'm not sure. So Joy was always looking for good deals, so he bought the railroad for the Chicago Burlington. And there were some problems, financial problems. Took a lot more money to work on than they thought, and eventually they had to let it go. But his plan was If you look up to the top, you can see a little bit of the UP that's in white, right about where the edge where you can't see anymore. Joy owned a tract of land on Tanagan. I guess that's how you say it. And it was a mineral mine, iron ore, and he was going to build a track from Tanagan to Merrill, and he did build this track, Merrill to Toma, and build a bridge across to La Crescent and come down this Dubuque area road. And the Illinois Central had a connection down here. So then they could go to Detroit. So in the wintertime, when shipping was hard and working in the mines was hard, they could do it. They could ship by train. But all this old River Road 8 thing fell apart. So I had to show you he had his successes, but he also had some things that didn't work out exactly right. This is a kind of an illustration of that. I don't have the Ontonagon thing in the UP, but one of their goals was to get to St. Paul as well. I'm not sure what was going on in St. Paul, but everybody really wanted to get up there. I know there were wood products, and that was probably it. But another of James Joy's visions. Detroit to Chicago to Dubuque, St. Paul. Joy working in the Midwest had so many railroads going on. Haven't named a 10th of them. The question comes up periodically, how did he communicate? He wasn't out there the whole time. He would come to visit everything, but he didn't stay. Well, Western Union was how he communicated with his railroads. This one is was the Atchison Road. And the guy that was the director engineer of that road, they were building it up to Lincoln, Nebraska from Kansas City, was named Firth. He was a young man, and he needed to communicate periodically. Here he's asking for $18,000 for equipment and telling Joy that he tapped his checking account for $18,000. And there's a little bit of a story with Firth. Firth was a young man, and he was working on that railroad that was heading towards Lincoln, Nebraska. And part of it was done, but it was poorly done, and Joy was having him rebuild it. And he was checking on the parts that needed to be redone. And he and his one of his helpers was sitting on the cow catcher of a locomotive, and they were approaching a little bit of a swale where there was a dip in the road, and the guys who had built all that poorly built that little expanded bridge poorly, and it crashed in. And Firth was on the cow catcher. So when it went down into the little bit of a ravine, it squished him and the other guy, killed them both. Railroad work was dangerous. Okay. Joy, I think most of us probably know that Joy was the champion road builder in Michigan. What you see in red was what he either built or completed. And what you see in black is the Michigan Central that was already built out to Kalamazoo. And here's a list of them. Okay, Joy was known for a couple of things. One was his chicken scratch signature. He wrote this out. Shoot. Amos, that's supposed to say Amos Root. He was the president of the Grand River Valley Railroad. Oh, I didn't write Valley in Grand River Valley Railroad. And he had taken a loan out from Jackson. I'm not sure if it was Jackson City. I think it was Jackson City, but it could have been Jackson County for the railroad. And he couldn't pay it. Ran out of money. Couldn't pay it back when it was due, and they were going to end that government, whichever one it was, probably the city, was going to take the railroad. So he came to Joy saying, "Can you help me? I don't want to lose my railroad." So Joy had deep pockets because of a couple things. One, he had those financial guys on the East Coast, but he also had, at this point in 70, he was the president of the Michigan Central. And he had an account there to use at his discretion. And it had $175,000 in it in 1870. $178,000. That's like 3.5 million at his discretion. So he told Amos, "Yeah, I'll buy your road." Or I guess really it was a lease. But what was due to Jackson was 50,000. So Joy wrote 2 checks for 25,000 and paid off the debt. He let Amos stay as president on the road for a while. I'm not sure, I can't remember how long, but eventually the Grand River Valley rolled into control of the Michigan Central. What else was I going to say about this? I think that's probably it. Okay, this is one of Joy's last railroads. And it was interesting because this railroad has no records hardly. I don't know what happened. I think that they were disposed of somehow by accident, maybe, I'm not sure. And it's a little bit complicated. I'll see if I can explain it to you. Joy bought this railroad. Joy bought the Detroit Logansport and St. Louis Railroad, which was going to run to Detroit, but they didn't have the charter, I don't think, all the way to Detroit. And they didn't have everything done only up to Butler, which was about halfway. But Joe had his vision. He was going to finish that road. So he bought that section, and then he hired a work crew to finish the section up to Detroit. And he called that road, that part, the Detroit, Butler, and St. Louis. And while he was building that, Jay Gould, who was the president of the Wabash, already had a road from St. Louis up to Logansport. Logansport was some sort of draw. I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with the history of Logansport, but there's so much about people trying to get to Logansport. So maybe that'd be something someone might look into and tell me. Why it was called Logansport. Must have had some access, maybe river access or lake access to Lake Michigan. I'm not sure. But anyway, so the Wabash had the road from there to St. Louis. So Jay Gould approached Joy and told him, "If you finish this road, I'll lease it from you." So that basically would pay for that road. So Joy said, "Sure. Okay. I'm only interested in Detroit, residents of Detroit, having access to different places in the country." And that's what Joy kind of had in his mind with everything he did. How is this going to help Detroit? So that happened. The Wabash rented this stretch of road. Well, it wasn't too long before Jay Gould, I don't know if you know about Jay, but he had a checkered career, and some people thought he was kind of a shaky guy, and I don't know, but apparently he wasn't making the payments on the rent. So Joy bought himself into a directorship. Well, he was rich, and that's how it worked. So Joy became a director to make sure that his rent for this stretch of road was being paid for. And right around this, just not too long after that, all this building that Jay Gould did, especially, well, I'm going to say west of the Mississippi, just started to unravel. It was going bankrupt. And Jay Gould walked away. And that's a shame, because I was just watching a TV show on railroad history, and they covered several railroads. And when they got to the Wabash, they gave Jay Gould credit for saving the Wabash. And he didn't have anything to do with it. Joy stepped up from his directorship and became president of the Wabash. And he did what he had to do to save it. And what he did was he redesigned, reorganized, I guess is the right word, the railroad based on some new concepts that didn't cost everybody money. I'm not familiar with, it's in law books now about how Joy did it. And from that point on, all the bankruptcies went through this special procedure. And that's what the Wabash did, went through a special procedure. And Joy stayed with it until it was all done. It was kind of a complicated situation, but investors did not get totally wiped out. All that happened, for the most part, that I could see, was a lot of lines that he leased, that Jay Gould leased, that weren't productive back around the Mississippi River. They got out of those leases. So the rest of the railroad that was solid stayed solid. And that was all Joy's work. One more great thing that he did for railroading. Okay, is there anything else I want to say about this? I don't think so. Okay, this is the second to the last thing that Joy did with railroading. And it's kind of was a mystery to me. Most solid railroad fans in Michigan probably have a handle on this, but I didn't. Joy built the Detroit Union Railroad Depot and Station Company. And you can see that it's next to the Michigan Central Yard. And this was after Joy, long after he retired from the Michigan Central. And he attached his road to this area, ran a track right to it. So if I go back, you can see Del Rey on here. That was on the edge of Del Rey. So there was a railroad that fed the Detroit Union Depot. What it did was made room for other railroads that wanted to come in. And one of them was the Wabash. The Wabash was being temporarily housed at a different station. I can't remember now which one. But this thing that Joy built had a roundhouse, had freight houses, had a grain elevator, had docks to load train cars onto ships. Oh, it also had this little spot right here as a passenger station. Ever since I found out about this, I've been trying to find a picture of that station, and nobody has one. So if you know somebody who has a picture of the Detroit Union Railroad Depot, passenger station. I would surely like to see it. So what else about this? Oh, 4th Street Union Depot is up here. And that was his last hurrah. I don't know if I have a slide for that. I'm still on the Wabash. Okay, something interesting about the Wabash. Railroad guys know that flag. It's probably the most recognized railroad flag in existence. I would say that's probably true. Well, when Joy became president of the Wabash, he authorized this flag to be the Wabash flag. And that flag ran the Wabash line until about 1901 or so, when it was redesigned. But Joy had his hand in the Wabash flag. I know that's not a big deal for most people, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I wanted to say one more thing about 4th Street. 4th Street Union Depot was one of Joy's babies. He was 80 years old, about 80 years old when it was built. And people sometimes ask, what did Joy have to do with it? Well, I found an interview. I can't find it right now. Said that he did everything to do with it. He planned it. Anything that had anything to do with any planning, organized it, found the financing. So the only thing he didn't do was lay the bricks. And that was really pretty much the last thing that he did. When he died in 1896, he was 86 years old. And the highly popular Railway magazine did a eulogy. And I found probably at least a dozen newspapers that published his death, all the way from California to New York to Florida. He was very well known in his time. And I don't know how we got to the point where we didn't know who he was, but some of it I could say we can lay at his feet. He did not do interviews. Now I say that, he did a couple little ones, but he would like answer one question. You want to interview me? Sure. What's the question? And the question would be asked and he'd tell it and he'd be done. So he didn't make himself available. And that was probably pretty important. And another thing that made him probably not as well known is a lot of his work being in the Midwest. That information, the railroad information, stayed with the railroad commissioners of those states. So who had access to that? If I was going to write a bio of him, in which I did, I did not want to drive to Topeka, Kansas, or Jefferson City, Missouri. So people didn't really have access to information without a lot of trouble. Well, now that's all changed with the internet and Google. Google copied all those books. So when I was writing the book, his bio, I could just get online. And any book that was older than 50 or 80, I forget how many years, the whole book was online, so I could read it. Like, so if I wanted to read about 1871, what he was doing in Kansas, I could pull that up. Couldn't do that until then. Okay. Lots of the newspaper articles. This is, I think, the last of it. lots of newspaper articles that talked about Joy, and he was in the newspaper quite a bit, I would say. They always mentioned the Joy system, and that was one thing that Joy did. He didn't really build isolated railroads or even railroads from one place to the other. He built roads that came back to Detroit. You can't always see all the connections, but they were the ones that were finished. This one we talked about earlier, the Merrill, that never got finished, so it wasn't connected. But the rest of these were all, he was Detroit focused. Michigan and, Michigan focused too, but mostly Detroit. Okay, I guess it's time to take questions if you have any.
I just want to note for all of you in the audience, Mr. Marsh can't see any of you. He just did that whole presentation without receiving any feedback from the room. And Mr. Marsh, I want you to know you have about 25 dedicated history and railroad buffs in this room who are inside listening to this on a beautiful day. I think the Lions are playing. And so these folks were just so excited to be here and hear you today.
Oh my, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we really appreciate you being here with us at the library today.
Great.
Since Mr. Marsh cannot hear or see the audience, y'all could, if you have questions, you can come up here and face the computer like I am to ask, or you can relay them to me and I'd be happy to send that question to Mr. Marsh. But if it's a long one, you should probably come up and ask yourself. Questions? Did Joy, after he came to Detroit, primarily live here in Detroit?
Yeah, he only lived part-time, like had an apartment or something in Chicago, and he would zoom home so often and so fast and get back to work that he had a nickname when he was working in there, and they were calling him the Comet. Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing that I wanted to. A town in Illinois was named after Joy, and it still exists.
Yes.
Specifically where in Detroit did he live?
Do you know specifically where in Detroit he lived?
He lived on Fort Street. Really close to the depot, to the third, and 2 streets up from where the depot was. I had a,
Do you know if his house is still there?
no. Something that happened funny to me anyway was all these guys that were, not all of them, many of them had their houses torn down after they died. His son Henry did, and a couple others that I forgot. I just noticed that was kind of odd. I did have a couple more things that I had I thought I had I thought the slide was a different slide show. I built it up quite a bit since then, and I had some things that if there's still time. Is there still time for me to make a?
Sure, we still have about 10 minutes.
Okay. Let me get organized here. Okay, I think I'll start here.
Did Joy build the depot that we see now?
I have another question for you, Mr. Marsh. Did Joy build the depot that we see now?
No, that was built many years after Joy died. But interestingly enough, if you look at the records, the receipts that were paid on building that new depot there at Werner. And the name of the company that was paying them was a company that Joy built, or not built, but formed. And it was the Detroit River Tunnel Company. He did that at the end of his term, so it had to be like 1870 or something. He formed that company, and for some reason, whoever came after him just said, well, we might as well just keep on using that company rather than try to form another one. So it was funny for me to see that title on the paperwork.
Mr. Marsh knows what of the progeny of Mr. Joy family following.
Sure, there's another question about Mr. Joy's descendants and what they got up to.
Well, I didn't do very much research on them, actually. We know that Henry, of course, took his inheritance from his dad and bought into Packard and brought them to Detroit. One of his daughters, Martha, got killed, oddly enough, in a train accident over on the west coast of Michigan. The Chicago, and let me think, I think I have that written down here. Let me organize this really quick. No, I guess yeah. Chicago and Grand Trunk Railway at Bellevue, Michigan, 1893. She was on her way to the World's Fair in Chicago, and they had their own railroad car, of course. And the Chicago Grand Trunk ran into it. It was out in where it shouldn't have been. But yeah, killed her and her husband. That was in 1893. Martha. And the other ones, I can't think of anything that they did that's remarkable that I can think of. But I want to tell you a couple things that Joy did that I didn't mention, little things. He was a newspaper man, president of the Detroit Tribune from 1880 to 1884. When he was president of the Michigan Central Railroad, that was 1867 to 1877, he was at the same time president of 9 other roads and a director of 9 more roads. So you can see how much he had his hand in the business. He, when you look at the list of railroads that he dealt with over his lifetime, he was president, director, or lawyer for at least 51 railroads. If you add the titles of owner, co-owner, receiver, untitled railroad controller, or just the paper charter owner, he had his name on 100 different railroads. He argued several cases in front of the Supreme Court. He won 2 that resulted in legal precedents and still in place today. One of them, I can remember, had to do with water washing land away. If you own property, you bought property against like a lake, and the stake for your edge of your property was at the edge of the water, and the water had a big storm and washed away 10 feet of your land, did you still own land out to that stake? And no, that's what the current law is. If you get washed away, you lost that land. You don't get to build the dock out into the lake and claim it's your property. Let's see. Oh, here's something that's a little bit of probably needs more research, but Joey's son-in-law was a medical doctor. And during and after the Civil War, he complained to Joy that they didn't have enough doctors in Detroit to take care of all these people that needed surgery. So Joy rounded up some of his rich friends and founded the Detroit College of Medicine and Surgery. 20 years later, that expanded. They added veterinarian and dental training. And in 1933, the name changed to the College of the City of Detroit. They added education and some other things. The next year, so it'd be 1934, the name changed to Wayne State University. So Joy planted the seed for Wayne State University. If you try to find that information from a site on Wayne State University or anything, you cannot find that. At least I couldn't. I shouldn't say you can't find it. I could not find it. The last thing I like to say.
Relationship with Abraham Lincoln.
Mr. Marsh, we had another question. If you
Okay.
could tell us more about Joy's relationship with Abraham Lincoln.
They were friendly. I've seen letters going back and forth. But he was his boss. He was Lincoln's boss, and he was a tough boss. And I think that Lincoln made, well, I don't know if this is true or not, but the story is that Joy let Lincoln run a case, take lead in a case, and it was a big case. And when he won, Lincoln wanted more money for that award for his award than he got. And Joy didn't help him, but he said, you need to go to the boss for that. So Lincoln went to the boss, and I guess he argued the case well enough where he got paid a considerable amount of money at the time. And Lincoln used that money to run for president later on. But the letters were nice, and his son, of course, thought a lot of Lincoln because Henry was trying to build that road across the United States, and they called it the Lincoln Highway, and he wouldn't have done that if he didn't think that his dad and Lincoln got along. But Joy, some people wanted Joy to run for Secretary of War in another position under Lincoln. But it had to be picked. It wasn't something to run for. It had to be picked. And Lincoln did not pick Joy on either case. And Joy was pretty eager to, Supreme Court. Excuse me. 2 positions on the Supreme Court came open while Lincoln was president. And Joy really wanted one of those, and he didn't get one. Lincoln didn't help him. So I don't know. I don't know what the relationship was. I think it was probably strained at some points, but the letter, I mean, one thing I didn't, or maybe I mentioned today in talking about Kansas, that they were in that when Lincoln was president, some ruffians were giving the railroad people a rough time in southern Kansas, so bad that Joy needed some help, and he contacted the federal government, and they sent troops. So, I don't know that had to be cleared with Lincoln or what, but so I guess I'm just going to say I don't really know. That's a good question. But there's one other thing I wanted to mention, that when you think about Joy's impact on Detroit, Joy also owned some railroad car building factories. He was co-owner, part owner, and because they built these factories, that brought other industry in to make steel, and not steel, but at the time was only iron. But it really built up that kind of industrial production in Detroit. And to the point that when Henry Ford came along, he built his first real factory at Milwaukee Junction. And he did that because shipping and receiving of car parts, he could ship his cars all over the United States in 1904 or whenever he started doing that. And Milwaukee Junction was built by the makers, or the owners of Detroit, the Detroit and Milwaukee Railroad. And guess who that was? James Joy built that railroad. So Ford leaned on Joy for distribution and car parts. There's almost no end. I mean, you can just keep on going and going with Joy. But that's all I think I have.
I think we have a few more questions.
Okay.
How to get your book?
Can you tell us how to get your book?
Yes, my address, my PO box is up on the screen right now, or you can email me. And I have a lot of books, so I don't know which book you want. If you want Joy or the Joy book is $35. I pay shipping. Michigan Central book, I only have a few of those left. I'm selling those for $45 still. Those are original prices. So we could talk on email or any way you want to go about it. They're not for sale. Well, I should say they are on eBay. Right now they're on eBay. I don't know how long they'll stay on eBay. But I mail them quickly. If you send me a check, I'll mail them to you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or anybody with a longer question or comment that wants to come up? I think that might do it, Mr. Marsh. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, we really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Okay, thank you. You too.
Thank you.